Consumers want to know the facts about the products they buy, but America's agricultural landscape is not easy to navigate. Between different companies, scientific advancement, government regulations, advertisement campaigns, and an unhealthy amount of myth and misconception, anyone would be hard-pressed to make sense of it. That's where Real Ag comes in. From the producers who make your food, to the store where you buy the final product, and everything in between. This is Real Ag. Now, here's your host, Kyle Bauer.
We're fortunate as Americans that we have an abundance of food, so we might as well make healthy choices. Better tools and knowledge have led to healthier pigs, more efficient farms, and better pork products. Pork is our topic today on Real Ag.
Production of Real Ag is made possible by
the Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by farmers.
Swine were domesticated actually back about 7000 BC in the Middle East, so certainly a long time ago. And wild pigs or boar meat was actually documented in the Chinese old recipes of over 2,000 years ago. In the U.S., pigs were first brought to Florida by Hernando de Soto in 1525. So pork has been part of the U.S. or the North American continent for several centuries.
You know, they're a pretty versatile animal because they're fairly tame, fairly intelligent, and then they had a lot of uses. So they could, I mean, the obvious one is use it to eat their meat, but they also use their bones to make tools, and they use their skin for leather, to make shields, weapons, that sort of thing. And then they used to always use their hair too to make use the bristles to make brushes. So there was just a lot of use for pigs, and that just made them a easy animal to domesticate for all of the different uses.
What are they?
Is pork nutritious?
Well, interestingly, pork has really changed in the last 25 years. You know, the pig that your grandparents probably raised on the farm is not the pig that we have today. I mean, they used to want pigs to carry a lot of fat because they used the fat for cooking. I mean, they rendered the fat for lard, so, you know, because grandmas used a lot of lard in cooking and making pie crusts and those sorts of things. But, you know, we kind of learned that that's probably not the healthiest source of fat. And so, you know, through genetic improvements, the pork is actually a lot leaner than it was back then. And today, the pork tenderloin is actually just as lean as the skinless chicken breast.
The nutrition of pork comes in a variety of different aspects when we talk about the overall qualities that it brings. We often talk about a portion size being a 3-ounce meat portion, and that'll bring approximately 1/3 of the daily protein requirement that we need. In addition, pork is very rich in B vitamins. In fact, it'll bring approximately 1/3 of the B vitamins that we need on a daily basis. In addition, trace minerals such as zinc and copper, manganese, those are all brought with as well. One of the aspects and what's really changed about pork over the last several decades is that it's become a much leaner product. And when I say leaner, just less fat in the actual muscle or on the outside. One of the things that as pork genetics have changed as swine farmers have improved the quality of pork, one of the things has been its emphasis on producing a leaner product. We want to produce more lean muscle for food, as well as have that leaner product that does have a less total amount of fat that is consumed by consumers. The grading of pork is much different than that of beef. There is grades, basically acceptable or not acceptable in terms of the quality that would be used in restaurants, in grocery stores as fresh product. If something is deemed unacceptable, which is actually very rare by the governmental inspectors that are there, it just went into the processed food side. So still safe to consume, just has quality attributes that they did not feel were satisfactory to go into a restaurant or a grocery store type setting as a fresh product. Certainly on the beef side, we have the grading. People are maybe familiar with the prime, the choice, the select grades. In pork, we do not grade based on the amount of marbling or fat that's in the meat itself. A lot of those products at the processing are sold whole, where we don't actually dissect or slice them to do that type of grading.
What determines quality for the pork producer?
Quality takes a lot of different forms. If we have from the perspective of the swine producer, they view quality as raising a pig that's healthy, efficient in how it grows, and ultimately carries the safety with it that it'll be safe to consume by the consumer themselves. From a packing perspective, for those marketing the meat, back to the leanness. They want a lean product that's high in muscle characteristics that ultimately producers and consumers are buying to consume. But also we want, it's interesting, some of the times pigs are what they eat, just like humans. If we feed an animal of an ingredient that has soft fat characteristics, such as we feed a pig soy oil as part of an energy source so they grow faster, they'll actually deposit that fat similar to what they consume, so it's a softer fat. And then ultimately, when we go to cook that pork chop, sausage, the bacon, that fat becomes softer in terms of what is consumed versus a firmer fat. Most consumers like a firmer fat, so it's not as flimsy or it doesn't necessarily get squishy by any means, but they would like a firmer product. And so we can feed or avoid those soft fats so the pigs are what they eat, and ultimately the consumer then is consuming the type of products or grains, characteristics and feed characteristics that animal was fed during its lifespan prior to being processed for meat. So over time, producers want to select animals that are very efficient in how they grow. And what I refer to as efficient is that they consume, for the amount of feed that they eat, that they put on more weight and they're more efficient in terms of digesting, absorbing, and putting that feed, the energy and the protein, the vitamins and minerals they consume every day in their feed into their body. And this is for a couple reasons. One, it lowers the amount of feed that it takes to grow that pig to its market weight. So from an environmental standpoint, it reduces the carbon footprint per se, because there's less inputs coming in for what they actually produce. And when they do that, the animal's more efficient, and then it's also should lower the cost to raise that animal because it took less feed to put on the same weight. Now from a maternal or mothering side, when those genetics are selected, certainly we want females that are going to have larger litters. Pigs right now, it's interesting, it's really changed over time. When a sow has a litter of pigs, she'll have approximately 13 to 16 piglets at one time. So those genetics have improved so that she is able to have more piglets, which means then we're simply producing more food ultimately for the consumers, not only in the U.S. but around the world. Along with those sows and the mothers, we want to select for high milk production. If she's having a large litter, she needs to be able to support them with adequate amount of daily amount of milk and nutrients so they grow and are healthy as they start to develop. And really from the genetic standpoint there's a lot of emphasis. It's a fascinating area. The genetics folks have kind of their own, there's breeding companies, there's businesses that have been developed that focus on the improvements of not only making efficient, but there's things that we can do to select for improved health, improved reproduction, and ultimately improved meat quality. So as we raise animals more efficiently, we don't want to do that at the sacrifice of having a meat product for the consumer that's not as high quality or not as acceptable in terms of their eating experience.
What is the life cycle of a pig?
Yep, it's actually a very interesting life cycle. We start with the sows or gilts, which is a female pig. The sow is after she's had a litter. So those are our two terms for our female pigs. And so we start with them in gestation. So they're in the gestation for about 115 days, or as I learned it, 3 months, 3 weeks, 3 days, which is always a fun fact for pig production. Anyway, they're bred and they're in gestation for about 115 days. And then they go into the farrowing barn, which is where we have our kind of maternity suites. And so they're in the farrowing unit. They give birth there, and then they're there for about 3 weeks on average. And that's where the baby pigs start to grow up. That's where they're suckling off the dam. And then after they are about 3 weeks of age, we wean them into either a nursery or a wean to finish barn, which is where they would stay for the life cycle as they grow up. So once they're about 3 weeks old, then they go to that nursery or wean to finish barn. In the nursery, they're there for about 8 or so weeks, depending on the type of unit that they're in, and then they would move to a finishing barn. So hence the nursery finish type of facility, or the wean to finish type of facility. So the growing stage is probably about 26 to 30 weeks of age, and then they would go to harvest.
Pigs grow very rapidly, and so when we talk about the life cycle, one way, if we want to kind of start from the mothering side, if we're going to breed or have a sow that we're going to have in our herd, she's often about 7 to 8 months of age and weighs about 300 pounds.
Once they're weaned, then we transition them dietary-wise to a more complex, which is a diet with a lot of protein, a lot of different ingredients, because they're going from a milk-based diet to a solid food diet. So they're transitioned by phase, and we try to match their nutritional needs to what they actually need to grow, so we're not wasting nutrients. And so then we feed them in about, I would say on average, about 7 to 8 different diets throughout their life, and then they would eventually go to a less complex diet, which is usually like a corn, soy-based diet throughout the finishing phase.
And during the finishing phase, those pigs will be grown from about 50 pounds to 280 pounds, and that takes about 16 weeks. So to think about from the life cycle of a pig to go to market, we're basically about 6 to 7 months of age to reach 280 pounds, which is just really fascinating to think of how fast these pigs grow. Now the sows themselves, once they're weaned from their piglets, approximately 5 days later, they'll come back into heat or the reproductive cycle starts again. At that point, that sow will get bred, and again, 114 days later, she can have another litter of pigs. With the emphasis on improved productivity, to be more efficient, to lower the environmental aspects, we simply can try to produce more pigs in the same area. And that's similar to almost any business trying to improve their output for what inputs they have. And so as we think of the sows producing more piglets, if historically we'd go back 20 to 30 years ago, oftentimes it was a goal of producers to have 9 or 10 pigs per sow. Well, today, only 20 years later, it's the goal of many producers to have 12 to 13. And so it's really remarkable in terms of how the genetic improvement, not only genetics, but we've learned a lot about taking care of sows better. We have better nutrition for them. We have a better environment in terms of the farrowing facilities that we have. We're able to dedicate more labor and time, and when we have specialized facilities that we have additional employees to help manage that. So as pigs reach their market weight, pigs are what we call the harvesting or slaughtering. Various terms that have been used over time, they all really revolve around the same concept. In modern current larger packing facilities or packing plants in the U.S., the majority of pigs are euthanized humanely through carbon dioxide exposure. And what happens in this is the pigs are in groups of 5. There's specialized equipment that's been put in place in these, where they basically groups of 5 pigs are moved together. They go into almost like a Ferris wheel type apparatus, and then when they go in, then they're exposed down to carbon dioxide. So basically they're just put to sleep. And so when you're in these facilities, it's a very low stress, low anxiety variety. There's no noise, and basically, yeah, they're just exposed and then they fall asleep and pass away in that fashion.
How are vaccines or antibiotics used?
From a vaccine standpoint, we use vaccines just like humans in terms of initially with baby pigs to help build immunity, help prevent disease, and all vaccines are regulated by the FDA or the Food and Drug Administration. If a company wants to introduce a new vaccine, they must file paperwork, they must go through safety testing of that product, and it takes many years, just like any human new vaccine or medication that's applied for. It takes many years and lots of investment by that company to show the efficacy or the effectiveness of it to treat a specific disease or help prevent a specific disease. There is no vaccines that are sold that have not been through some sort of Food and Drug Administration review and approval.
The way that we do it is if a vaccine company has a vaccine that they've done their preliminary trials on, again, they have to prove the safety, that there's not going to be anything that's harmful to the animal or harmful to the meat product itself. Once they get to that stage, then they may get a conditional licensing, and then they will be ready to do some field trials. So we could use the vaccine at that point to get some more data to show whether the vaccine is going to work out in the field or not. Pork producers today are pretty proactive in that area. We have a pork quality assurance program that they go through basically to make sure that everyone that handles pigs on the farm understands the safety precautions that we need to make sure that we're putting out a wholesome product, and that goes for any antibiotics that they might be using to treat sick animals, or just safety procedures for giving antibiotics or giving vaccines, that they're using appropriate needle sizes, for example. And so everybody on the farm goes through what we call PQA, which is pork quality assurance, so that they're educated in that area.
From an antibiotic or medication perspective, pigs are naive to various diseases and bacteria just like any other livestock or humans themselves. And so we need antibiotics are very important for the production of healthy, safely consumed meat by consumers. Pigs, again, they need time to get exposure to the different environments so they can develop their immunity. I often refer to it, I have 3 young children, and it never fails. The first week back in school, it happened this year, where my son somehow, we got pneumonia the first week after being exposed back, and he's in 2nd grade. And again, just as humans or any species are naive to certain viruses or bacteria that we pick up and get ill from, pigs are the same way. But there is vaccines that are out there to help prevent, just like we get immunizations as early in our human lives. We can do the same with pigs to help prevent diseases and to help build their immunity for the rest of their productive lives. And so, again, they become very important. When animals get sick, it's our duty, just as we humans take medication to get better, we have an animal welfare obligation to have that animal recover and be as healthy as possible. So we use those medications to get them over any challenges that they have as well.
We have a lot of respiratory and a lot of enteric challenges in some of those young pigs as they go. It's kind of like taking a kid to kindergarten. They get commingled with others, and sometimes, bacterial diseases tend to move around in those young pigs, and so sometimes we would treat those, but we're targeting a specific pathogen in that phase. The USDA would regulate the vaccine type use. The FDA is the one that regulates the antibiotic use, so we fall under their guidelines as far as what we're allowed to use and for what purpose.
Pigs of all ages can receive antibiotics from the very small piglets to a sow that's maybe been in the herd for 2 or 3 years if she becomes ill. And so again, this is done with veterinary oversight. Producers always have a veterinary client patient relationship with the veterinarian. Now there is some over-the-counter medications that are sold that a producer can use, but generally all those are still under with the advice of a veterinarian. Most swine operations have routine visits of a veterinarian, and then during those discussions they can discuss the health management plan. So every time a pig gets sick, they don't necessarily have to consult the veterinarian, but if they do have something that looks different, something's a little bit odd, or if a large number gets sick, a veterinarian will generally always get involved and help provide recommendations and use for the vaccines or the medications that are available to treat that group of pigs. Antibiotics, they can be administered really in three or four main ways. One, we can put antibiotics in the feed. And if we put in the feed, that whole group of pigs would receive treatment of that. We can do injectables. This is a very common way of identifying if we know just individual pigs are sick. We can use an injectable through a needle and syringe, just again similar to the human side, that we have injectable antibiotics that those pigs are treating individually. We also can put some medications through the water system. So if we want to have, if a group of pigs get sick, the fastest way, instead of reordering feed and getting the old feed out of bins, which can take a couple days, we can actually administer it directly in the water supply that day to start getting that medication to them.
With the PQA program, or Pork Quality Assurance Program, we're supposed to be keeping track of the animals and what they have received as far as the antibiotics, and then also the withdrawal period, or the time that they need to have last had that antibiotic before they can go into the food chain.
All packing facilities, or those that are buying pigs, require that producers are part of this certification program. Part of that program requires and has education for producers to keep track on a daily basis, a log sheet of every pig or every group that received medication in terms of the date, the time, what was administered. Also includes what we have as a withdrawal period. Some antibiotics, there's no concern in terms of if we fed them up to the point, and then even if they received it today, they could still go to be harvested, and that meat would be safe because it's not deposited at quantities or back into those muscle tissues that be consumed. Some medications do carry what we call a residue, and so there's a period of time it takes for that to clear out of the body down to a level that we would term safe. And when we talk about pork quality, with the safety aspect comes here as well. So we call that a withdrawal period. And so if we used a medication on individual pigs, and that medication has a withdrawal period that was put in place by the Food and Drug Administration for 7 days. That would tell us for the next 7 days that pig could not leave that facility and enter the food chain. But after that 7 days, the amount of antibiotics isn't present, or at such a low level it's not a food safety concern for the consumption. And so that's where a lot of the discussion with antibiotics and the no antibiotic claims that come in, the reality is no pork that is sold has antibiotics in that is of concern. And so that's something we try and provide education to consumers, that because even if a pig received antibiotic when it was young, that antibiotic is not present when it goes to harvesting and then the processing side.
There are withdrawal times on the approved products, and sometimes actually we adhere to different withdrawal times which are extended versus what's on the label. And those are either because we're exporting to different countries which have more strict withdrawal times that we need to adhere to, or sometimes if we're using it in something that's under veterinary guidance, then we extend the withdrawal time to ensure that we don't have residue in the food chain.
How do we provide assurance to the consumer that the producer followed the proper withdrawal period and that was all done correctly? In fact, there is. At the packing plants themselves, the Food Safety Inspection Service of the USDA actually does residue testing of pigs to verify that they are not carrying any level of antibiotics in that meat tissue or other products that would be consumed that is of concern. So yes, and producers of today recognize if they are in violation, they will lose their ability to sell market hogs, which obviously affects their livelihood, what they're doing. There has to be the level of trust. I mean, the consumer's got to trust where that meat product is coming from. Producers our swine producers today understand that. That is for many of them, that's their sole business. We don't have many farmers no longer have the diversification of crops, cattle, pigs, poultry, dairy that we once did when many of our grandparents were farming. Today, most individuals just have one species. And so they specialize in that and know that they have to have the trust of the consumer. And if they break that trust, consumers are going to quit buying their product and they're going to be out of business. And so again, it's that trust factor, and also that if a mistake is made by an employee or something isn't documented, those animals are still tested at a harvest facility, at a packing plant by the USDA to verify, in fact, that there isn't residue present. The hormone issue is one that has been very challenging to educate consumers on, because when you say the word hormone, it sounds pretty scary, and there's no doubt that it can be. But the fact of the matter is there is not a single hormone that is ever fed, injected, provided to pigs or poultry in the U.S. None's ever been approved. And so when we see some of the advertising that some restaurants in particular, or some labeling that says hormone-free pork, it's laughable, because there's never been injected or provided hormones to any pig anytime ever in the U.S. And so I think we need to continue that education, and consumers need to recognize that when those label claims are made, their response should be no kidding. And because in fact they've never been provided that. So some of the times that some companies try and gain a marketing edge, it's not false advertising, because it's absolutely true, but every piece of pork in that meat counter could carry that same label.
We hope today's program has given you some useful information about pork. That wraps up this episode of Real Ag. Remember, you can see every program of this series by going to SmokyHillsTV.org. I'm Kyle Bauer, and this has been Real Ag.
Production of Real Ag is made possible by
The Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by farmers.